I was standing in the executive conference room on the 42nd floor when Connor Blake decided to end my career. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mahogany table where 12 Japanese executives sat in perfect silence, their expressions carefully neutral as they watched the spectacle unfold. I'd spent 11 months building this moment, learning their language, understanding their culture, navigating the intricate dance of international business negotiations, and Connor. He'd been in his role for exactly 17 days. Ms. Keen's services will no longer be required, he announced, butchering the pronunciation of Mr. Takahashi's name for the third time that morning. Effective immediately, the words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. I felt the weight of every gaze in the room, but I kept my eyes on the Kyoto International delegation. Mr. Takahashi, their lead negotiator, had the slightest furrow in his brow. Ms. Yamamoto, their legal counsel, was studying me with an intensity that suggested she understood exactly what was happening. They'd flown 14 hours from Tokyo for this meeting. They'd trusted me to bridge the gap between their traditional business values and Veltrix Dynamics' aggressive Western approach. And now, in the middle of our most crucial negotiation session, I was being discarded like yesterday's coffee. My name is Natalie Keene. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years perfecting the art of corporate diplomacy. I speak 4 languages fluently, hold advanced degrees in international business and East Asian studies, and have facilitated over $3 billion in cross-border deals. But to Connor Blake, newly appointed head of strategic initiatives at Veltrix Dynamics, I was just another expendable female middle manager standing between him and his vision of corporate glory. The silence stretched on. In Japanese business culture, silence is a tool, a space for consideration and respect. Connor, predictably, couldn't stand it. "Well," he snapped, his face flushing red. "Are you going to translate that for our guests, or do I need to handle this meeting myself?" I rose slowly from my chair, smoothing my charcoal suit jacket. Every movement was deliberate, controlled. I'd learned long ago that in moments of crisis, dignity was the sharpest weapon in your arsenal. "Takahashi-san," I said in flawless Japanese, bowing precisely 15 degrees. "I deeply apologize for this unexpected disruption to our proceedings. As you've just witnessed, there have been some internal changes at Veltrix Dynamics. I will, of course, ensure a smooth transition to whoever will be taking over these negotiations." Mr. Takahashi's eyes flickered with something that might have been concern or opportunity. With Japanese executives, it was often hard to tell. "Kina-san," he replied, also in Japanese. "We entered these negotiations based on the relationship you've cultivated with Kyoto International over the past year. This development is concerning." Connor's face darkened. He hated when I spoke Japanese in meetings, claimed it was exclusionary, and undermined transparency. The truth was simpler, he hated not being in control. "English only in my meetings," he barked. "This is an American company." Ms. Yamamoto spoke for the first time, her English accented but precise. "Mr. Blake, perhaps we should postpone this session. It seems there are internal matters that require your attention." "Absolutely not," Connor said, pulling out the chair I'd just vacated and dropping into it with none of the grace I'd shown. "We're here to close this deal. Keene was just a liaison. I've got everything under control. Just a liaison." The words were calculated to diminish, to erase 11 months of relationship building, cultural navigation, and strategic positioning. But Connor had made a critical error. He'd shown his hand too early, revealed his ignorance too completely. And in that moment, as I gathered my leather portfolio and prepared to leave the room where I'd invested so much of myself, I made a decision. They thought I was leaving quietly. They were wrong. I paused at the door, turning back to face the room one last time. "Takahashi-san," I said in English this time, making sure Connor heard every word. "I'll be available should you need any clarification on the terms we've discussed. You have my personal number." The slight nod from Mr. Takahashi was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. So did Ms. Yamamoto. Connor, focused on shuffling through papers he clearly didn't understand, missed it entirely. The elevator ride down from the 42nd floor felt like a descent into a different world. With each passing floor, I shed the corporate facade I'd worn like armor. By the time I reached the lobby, I was already planning my next move. You see, Connor Blake had made several miscalculations. The first was assuming that firing me would simplify his path to closing the Kyoto deal. The second was believing that my value to the negotiation was merely as a translator. But his biggest mistake, he'd never bothered to check whether I'd signed a non-compete agreement. I hadn't. It was an oversight that would cost Veltrix Dynamics more than they could imagine. Because while Connor thought he was eliminating an obstacle, he was actually creating his most formidable competitor. And unlike him, I understood something fundamental about international business relationships aren't just professional courtesies, they're currency, and I was about to cash in every single one of mine. The February wind cut through downtown Chicago as I stepped onto the sidewalk. My phone was already buzzing. 3 messages from members of the Kyoto delegation, 2 from other clients I'd brought to Veltrix, 1 from Linda Voss, the financial journalist who'd been following the Kyoto negotiations with interest, but I didn't answer any of them, not yet. First, I had a stop to make. The offices of Hartley & Associates occupied a discreet suite in a building most people walked past without noticing. That was by design. Sarah Hartley specialized in corporate law for executives who understood that sometimes the best offensive move was a perfectly legal defensive position. "Natalie," Sarah said as I entered her office, "I was wondering when you'd finally walk through that door." I raised an eyebrow. "You were expecting me?" "I've been expecting you for 6 months," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "Ever since Veltrix brought in that new board member who started pushing for leadership changes. Coffee. Espresso, if you have it." "Of course." She pressed a button on her desk. "Marcus, 2 espressos, please." Then, to me, "So, Connor Blake finally made his move." "You know about Connor." Sarah smiled. It was the smile of a lawyer who'd seen every corporate power play in the book and had written countermoves for most of them. "I make it my business to know when talented women are about to be pushed out by insecure men. It's a growth market, unfortunately." The espresso arrived in delicate porcelain cups. I took a sip, letting the bitter warmth ground me in the moment. "I need to know my options," I said. "Legally, you mean?" Sarah pulled out a tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. "I pulled your employment records from Veltrix the day Connor was hired. Public filings are wonderfully informative. No non-compete clause, no non-solicitation agreement. The intellectual property assignments are limited to work product created using company resources." She looked up. "In other words, every relationship you've built, every insight you've gained, every strategy you've developed in your own time, it's yours. And if I were to start my own consultancy, then you'd be a fool not to." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "But you didn't come here just for legal clearance. You came here because you want to know if I'll represent you when Veltrix inevitably tries to sue you for succeeding where they failed." I set down my espresso cup. "Will you?" "I've been waiting 6 months to say yes." We spent the next 2 hours going through the details: corporate structure, banking, insurance, all the mundane necessities that would transform me from Natalie Keene, former director of Asia-Pacific Strategic Initiatives, to Natalie Keene, CEO of NK Strategies Ltd. "One more thing," Sarah said as I prepared to leave. "That shell company you set up in Switzerland last year." I froze. "How do you know about that?" "Because I helped you set it up, remember? Through my Swiss associate, you said it was for potential future investments." The memory clicked into place. 6 months ago, during a particularly frustrating leadership meeting where my contributions were dismissed and my strategies credited to male colleagues, I'd started thinking about exit plans. The Swiss company had been a safety net, a just-in-case provision I'd hoped never to use. "Is it still clean?" I asked. "Clean, funded with your personal investments, and ready to operate." Sarah handed me a folder. I took the liberty of updating the operating agreements. NK Strategies Limited can be fully operational within 72 hours. I took the folder, feeling its weight not just physical, but symbolic. This was my declaration of independence. Sarah, why are you doing this? You could make far more money representing Veltrix and trying to shut me down. She walked me to the door. Because I've watched too many brilliant women get pushed out of positions they earned by men who couldn't find their way out of a paper bag with GPS and a search party. And because, she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Because Kyoto International contacted me 6 weeks ago, they wanted to know if I could recommend someone for strategic consulting work, someone who understood their culture, their values, and their vision for AI-driven logistics expansion. And you recommended? I told them I'd know the right person when I saw her. She opened the door. I'm seeing her now. The pieces were falling into place faster than even I had anticipated. But there was still one crucial element missing: intelligence. I needed to know what Connor was planning, how he intended to close the Kyoto deal, and where he was vulnerable. Fortunately, I had allies Connor didn't even know existed. Marcus Chen, no relation to the countless other Chens in the financial district, had been my assistant at Veltrix for 3 years. Brilliant, observant, and perpetually underestimated because of his quiet demeanor. Marcus had access to every calendar, every email thread, every supposedly confidential memo that crossed the executive suite. We met at a dim sum restaurant in Chinatown, the kind of place where business was conducted in Cantonese and privacy was guaranteed by the din of 100 conversations. He's in over his head, Marcus said without preamble, sliding a folder across the table. These are his preparation notes for the next meeting with Kyoto. He's planning to strong-arm them into accepting terms that are 30% less favorable than what you negotiated. I flipped through the pages, my disbelief growing with each poorly constructed argument, each cultural misunderstanding, each tactical error. It was like watching someone try to perform brain surgery with a butter knife. He actually thinks they'll accept this. He thinks they have to. He's convinced that Veltrix is their only option for entering the North American market. Marcus poured tea, his movements precise despite his obvious agitation. He doesn't know about their conversations with Pinnacle Logistics. I nearly dropped my teacup. Pinnacle is courting Kyoto. Has been for 2 months. But Kyoto preferred working with you. You understood their need for gradual market entry, for maintaining face while expanding. Pinnacle wants to do a full acquisition. This changed everything. If Kyoto was already considering alternatives, and if Connor's negotiation style was as abrasive as these notes suggested. Marcus, I need you to do something for me, something that might put your position at risk. He met my eyes steadily. I've already submitted my resignation, effective in 2 weeks. I've been offered a position at a startup that actually values strategic thinking over ego. He paused. A startup that might need some consulting services from a newly formed strategic advisory firm. I smiled for the first time since leaving the conference room. Have I told you lately that you're brilliant? Not since Connor took over and banned positive feedback as participation trophy culture. He reached into his bag and pulled out another folder. These are the contact details for every Veltrix client you've personally brought in or managed. Public information, all of it, compiled from press releases and trade publications. I thought you might want to send them holiday cards. It's February. Lunar New Year cards. Then, we spent the next hour strategizing. Marcus would stay at Veltrix for his final 2 weeks, keeping his ears open and his head down. He'd document everything, every meeting, every decision, every spectacular failure of leadership that Connor demonstrated. Not for sabotage, but for protection. If Veltrix tried to claim I'd stolen proprietary information or violated some non-existent agreement, we'd need evidence of what really happened. One more thing, Marcus said as we prepared to leave. Linda Voss has been calling the office. She's working on a piece about leadership changes in international consulting firms. Connor refused to comment, but she seems very interested in the Kyoto negotiation. Linda Voss, one of the sharpest financial journalists in the business, with a particular interest in corporate governance failures and their impact on shareholder value. We'd spoken several times over the years. always on background, building a relationship based on mutual respect and carefully traded information. Maybe I should return her call, I said. Maybe you should. That afternoon, I sat in my home office, soon to be the temporary headquarters of NK Strategies Limited, and made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Linda Voss. Natalie, she said without preamble, I heard Connor Blake just shot himself in the foot with a rocket launcher. Care to comment? On the record, no, but off the record, I might have some insights about the challenges facing American companies trying to expand into Asian markets without cultural competency. I'm listening. I gave her enough to pique her interest without revealing my plans. The story of a major deal potentially falling apart due to leadership changes, the risks of dismissing regional expertise in favor of one-size-fits-all strategies, the possibility that competitors were circling, ready to capitalize on Veltrix's mistakes. This is fascinating, Linda said, but I need more than background. I need someone willing to go on record about the importance of cultural intelligence in international business. Give me a week, I said. You might have your source. The second call was to Mr. Takahashi's personal cell phone. He answered on the second ring. Kina-san, he said in Japanese, we were concerned when you left so abruptly. My apologies for the disruption. Takahashi-san, I wanted to assure you that my commitment to seeing Kyoto International succeed in its expansion remains unchanged. There was a pause. In Japanese business culture, what isn't said often matters more than what is. The presentation Mr. Blake gave after you left was interesting, Takahashi finally said. He seems to have a very different vision for our partnership than what we've discussed over the past months. I imagine so. Kina-san, may I speak frankly? Please do. Kyoto International values relationships. We've spent a year building trust with you, understanding that you grasp not just our business needs, but our cultural values. Mr. Blake spent 30 minutes explaining why those values are impediments to success in America. A longer pause. We disagree. My heart was racing, but I kept my voice calm. Takahashi-san, while I'm no longer with Veltrix, I remain committed to facilitating successful partnerships between Asian and Western companies. If Kyoto International ever needs strategic consulting services, do you have a business card for your new venture? He'd known. Of course he'd known. Japanese executives didn't survive in global business by missing obvious moves. I will within 72 hours. Then we'll speak in 73. The third call was to someone I'd hoped never to need, Robert Steinberg, senior partner at Steinberg, Cole & Associates, the most feared corporate litigation firm in Chicago. Sarah Hartley was brilliant at corporate structure and defensive positioning, but if Veltrix decided to play dirty and Connor's ego suggested he might, I'd need a warrior. Ms. Keene, Steinberg said when his assistant put me through. Sarah Hartley said you might be calling. I understand congratulations are in order on your new venture. News travels fast? In certain circles, yes. I also understand that Veltrix Dynamics might not appreciate the competition. Companies rarely do when the competition understands their weaknesses better than they do. I haven't competed with anything yet. No, but you will, and when you do, Connor Blake will realize he's not just losing a deal, he's losing face. Men like him don't handle that well. I could hear him shuffling papers. I've already had my team pull together a preliminary analysis of Veltrix's standard employment contracts and their history of litigation against former employees. It's surprisingly sparse. It seems they've never had someone of your caliber leave and take clients with them. I haven't taken any clients. Yet, his tone was amused. Ms. Keene, let me be clear. I don't chase ambulances, and I don't create conflicts where none exist, but I do protect clients who are building something valuable from companies that would rather destroy than compete. If you need us, we're here. Your retainer. Let's call it an investment in future success. Sarah Hartley doesn't recommend clients lightly. By evening, the foundation was set. NK Strategies Limited would be operational within days. I had legal protection, potential clients, and intelligence on my competition. But there was one element I hadn't anticipated. one that would accelerate everything Connor Blake's spectacular capacity for self-destruction. The email came at 9:47 p.m., sent to the entire Asia-Pacific team at Veltrix, CCing the board of directors. Marcus forwarded it to me within minutes, along with a simple note, "He's panicking." The email was a masterpiece of corporate desperation dressed up as decisive leadership. Connor announced a strategic pivot in the Kyoto negotiations, claiming that the previous approach had been too accommodating and failed to leverage Veltrix's natural advantages. He outlined his new strategy: aggressive pricing, shortened timelines, and what he called American-style efficiency. To anyone who understood Japanese business culture, it was a declaration of war. But the truly damaging part came in the final paragraph, where Connor, in his infinite wisdom, had decided to share his assessment of why the negotiations had been struggling. He blamed cultural misunderstandings, language barriers, and the previous negotiators' tendency to prioritize relationship building over results. He'd just insulted not only me but the entire Kyoto delegation, in writing. In an email that would inevitably leak. My phone rang. Sarah Hartley. "Tell me you've seen the email," she said without preamble. "I've seen it. He just handed you a gift-wrapped lawsuit for defamation and national origin discrimination. This email could be construed as explicitly stating that Japanese business practices are inferior to American ones." "I don't want to sue Veltrix," I said. "I want to beat them." "Even better. But keep this email. If they ever come after you, this is your get-out-of-jail-free card." The next morning, NK Strategies Ltd. was officially registered in Switzerland, with a subsidiary office in Chicago. My business cards arrived by courier at noon, elegant, understated, with just my name, title, and contact information. No flashy logos, no grandiose mission statements, just quality. At 2 p.m., I sent 3 emails. The first was to Mr. Takahashi, attaching my new business card and a simple message. "As discussed, I remain committed to facilitating Kyoto International's success in global markets. NK Strategies would be honored to consult on your expansion plans." The second was to 5 other executives I'd worked with over the years, clients I'd brought to Veltrix, partners I'd cultivated, relationships I'd built. The message was similarly simple: an announcement of my new venture and an offer to discuss their strategic needs. The third email went to Linda Voss. "I'm ready to go on record." The responses came faster than I'd anticipated. Within an hour, Takahashi had replied, requesting a meeting to discuss terms. 2 of the 5 other executives expressed immediate interest, and Linda Voss. She wanted to meet that evening. We met at the Chicago Athletic Association, in a quiet corner of the game room where the chess sets provided perfect cover for strategic conversations. "So," Linda said, settling into her chair with a martini, "tell me about the fall of Veltrix Dynamics." "That's premature. They're not falling. Yet." She pulled out a digital recorder. "But they did just lose their head of Asia-Pacific strategic initiatives in the middle of a major negotiation. And according to my sources, the Kyoto deal is on life support." "Your sources are well informed." "They usually are." "So, Ms. Keen on the record, what happened?" I chose my words carefully. In chess, as in business, the key was to control the narrative without overplaying your hand. "Veltrix Dynamics is undergoing a strategic realignment," I said. "New leadership often brings new vision. Unfortunately, in international business, vision without cultural understanding is just expensive blindness." Linda's eyes sharpened. "Are you saying Connor Blake doesn't understand Asian business culture?" "I'm saying that successful international expansion requires more than spreadsheets and PowerPoints. It requires relationships built on mutual respect and understanding. When companies forget that, they don't just lose deals, they lose credibility. And your new firm, NK Strategies, exists to help companies bridge cultural and strategic gaps in international markets. We believe that understanding your partner's values isn't a weakness, it's a competitive advantage." "Speaking of partners," Linda said, leaning forward, "I understand Kyoto International might be reconsidering their options." I smiled. You'd have to ask them. I did. They declined to comment but mentioned they were exploring strategic alternatives to ensure successful market entry. That's corporate speak for "we're talking to someone else," isn't it? That's one interpretation. Linda turned off the recorder. Off the record. How bad is Blake going to screw this up? Off the record, he already has. He just doesn't know it yet. The article ran 3 days later. Cultural competency crisis. How Veltrix Dynamics lost its edge in Asian markets was picked up by every major financial publication. Linda had done her homework, interviewing industry experts, analyzing market trends, and painting a picture of a company that had systematically undervalued the very expertise that made them successful. She never mentioned me by name in connection with NK Strategies, but she didn't need to. Everyone in the industry knew who had built Veltrix's Asia-Pacific division, and everyone could do the math. The same morning the article appeared, I met with the Kyoto delegation at the Peninsula Hotel. This time, there were no Veltrix conference rooms, no Connor Blake, no pretense that I was anything other than what I was, a strategic consultant with deep understanding of their needs and the expertise to meet them. Kine-san, Takahashi began. We've reviewed your proposal. The terms are acceptable, but we have concerns. Please, share them. Veltrix Dynamics is a large company with many resources. NK Strategies is new. How can we be certain you can deliver the same level of service? It was a fair question, one I'd anticipated. Takahashi-san, what Veltrix offered you was infrastructure. What I offer is intelligence. You don't need a 42-floor building to understand that Kyoto's AI-driven logistics platform requires careful integration with existing North American supply chains. You need someone who understands both your technology and the market psychology of American businesses. Ms. Yamamoto spoke up. And if Veltrix attempts to interfere with our arrangement, then they'll discover that employment law in Illinois is very clear about the rights of consultants who were never bound by non-compete agreements. I slid a folder across the table. My legal team has prepared a comprehensive analysis. We're on solid ground. Takahashi reviewed the documents, occasionally consulting with Yamamoto in rapid Japanese. I understood every word, but kept my expression neutral. They were impressed by the thoroughness, concerned about potential conflicts, but ultimately interested in moving forward. There is one more matter, Takahashi said finally. We've been approached by Pinnacle Logistics with an acquisition offer. My stomach dropped, but I kept my composure. I see. We've declined, he continued. Kyoto International isn't interested in being acquired. We want a partner, not a parent company. Your proposal for a joint venture structure with gradual market entry aligns with our vision. Veltrix's proposal. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Mr. Blake suggested we were being too cautious. He used the phrase, paralysis by analysis. I winced. In Japanese business culture, careful analysis and consensus building weren't weaknesses, they were strengths. Connor had just insulted their entire corporate philosophy. NK Strategies believes in adaptive integration, I said. Moving at the pace that ensures success, not just speed, which is why we're prepared to sign a letter of intent for consulting services, Takahashi said, pending final approval from our board. Of course, my heart was pounding, but I maintained professional calm. Of course, what timeline are we discussing? We'd like to move quickly. The North American market opportunity won't wait forever. Can you have a full strategic plan ready in 2 weeks? 2 weeks? I'd spent 11 months on the Veltrix deal, and now I had 2 weeks to create something better. Yes. Then we have an agreement in principle. Takahashi stood, and I rose with him. The bow he offered was deeper than protocol required, a sign of genuine respect. Kine-san, we look forward to working with someone who understands that in business, as in life, the fastest path isn't always the wisest. That afternoon, I officially had my first client. The contract was worth $2.8 million in consulting fees, with performance bonuses that could triple that amount. But more importantly, it was validation. Connor Blake had thought he was eliminating an obstacle. Instead, he'd created a competitor. The next few days blurred together in a haze of strategic planning, team building, and careful relationship management. I brought on 2 analysts who'd worked with me at Veltrix and had recently decided to pursue other opportunities corporate speak for, saw the writing on the wall, and got out. I contracted with a Japanese cultural consultant to review every document, ensuring nothing would be lost in translation, and I worked 18-hour days crafting a strategic plan that would make the Veltrix proposal look like a child's crayon drawing. But the real victory came from an unexpected source. Marcus called on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with barely suppressed excitement. "You need to see this." We met at a coffee shop near his apartment, far from the financial district's prying eyes. He slid a tablet across the table, and I found myself looking at an internal Veltrix memo marked "Confidential Board Members Only." "How did you—" Connor's assistant accidentally CC'd me. "She's new. Confused the email groups." His smile was sharp. I unsubscribed myself after saving a copy. Of course. The memo was damning. Connor had been forced to report to the board that the Kyoto deal was experiencing delays due to cultural misalignment and the previous negotiators' overpromises. He was requesting additional resources and a 3-month extension to recalibrate expectations, but the best part was the final paragraph, where he'd been forced to admit that Kyoto had engaged alternative consulting services, and that Veltrix was now competing for a deal they'd once considered closed. "He's blaming you," Marcus said. "Claims you sabotaged the negotiations before leaving. Let him. While he's playing defense, I'll be building something better. There's more. The board's asking questions about other Asia-Pacific accounts. Thompson Industries, Nexus Automotive, Raventech. They all came through you, right?" They did. "They're all up for renewal in the next 6 months. A plan began forming in my mind. Not sabotage. I didn't need to destroy Veltrix. I just needed to offer their clients a better option. "Marcus, how would you like to be Chief Operating Officer of NK Strategies?" His eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I need someone who understands operations, who can build systems that scale, and who knows where all the bodies are buried at Veltrix." I leaned forward. "I can't match your Veltrix salary immediately, but I can offer equity, real ownership in something we build together." "When do I start?" "As soon as your 2 weeks are up. In the meantime, keep your eyes open. I have a feeling Connor's about to make more mistakes." I was right. Over the next week, Connor managed to alienate 3 more key clients with his American efficiency approach. He canceled a long-standing quarterly review with Thompson Industries to golf with potential investors. He sent a form letter to Nexus Automotive announcing strategic pricing adjustments, corporate speak for "we're raising your rates" without consultation. And he assigned a junior associate to manage the Raventech account. Despite their CEO's preference for senior-level attention, each mistake was an opportunity. I didn't reach out immediately, that would have been too obvious. Instead, I waited for them to come to me, and they did. The first was David Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries. We'd worked together for 5 years, building their Asian supply chain from nothing to a network that spanned 7 countries. "Natalie," he said when I answered his call, "I hear congratulations are in order." "Thank you. David, how are things at Thompson?" "Frustrating." No dancing around the subject. David had never been one for subtlety. "Connor Blake just canceled our quarterly review. Apparently, golf is more important than our $50 million annual spend." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be sorry. Be available. Can NK Strategies handle strategic consulting for supply chain optimization?" "We can. But David, I don't want to create conflicts. If you're happy with Veltrix—" "I'm not. Haven't been since they started treating relationships like transactions. When can we meet?" Within a week, I'd signed letters of intent with 3 former Veltrix clients. The combined value of the contracts exceeded $8 million annually, but more than the money, it was proof of concept. NK Strategies wasn't just viable, it was necessary. The tipping point came on a Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing the final Kyoto presentation when Sarah Hartley called. "Have you seen Veltrix's stock price today?" she asked. I pulled up the financial markets on my screen. Veltrix was down 12% in early trading. What happened? Linda Voss happened. Her follow-up article just went live. The Veltrix Exodus: How One Company's Cultural Blindness Cost Them 3 Major Clients. She doesn't name you directly, but she does mention that several clients have switched to a new consulting firm founded by former Veltrix personnel. I found the article online. Linda had been thorough, interviewing industry analysts, reviewing public filings, and painting a picture of a company in crisis. The quote that would haunt Connor came from an unnamed source familiar with the negotiations. They confused arrogance with confidence and bulldozing with leadership. In international business, that's a recipe for disaster. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Connor's in trouble. The next 24 hours would determine everything. Either Connor would find a way to spin this crisis to his advantage, or the board would realize they'd bet on the wrong horse. Either way, I had work to do. The Kyoto presentation was scheduled for Monday. I spent the weekend refining every detail, anticipating every question, preparing for every contingency. This wasn't just about winning a client, it was about proving that expertise trumps ego, that understanding beats undermining, that building bridges works better than burning them. Sunday night, as I made final adjustments to the presentation, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Keene, this is Elizabeth Hartwell from the Veltrix Board of Directors." My blood ran cold. This was it, the legal threat. The cease and desist. The corporate muscle flexing I'd been expecting. "Ms. Hartwell, what can I do for you?" "I'll be direct. The board is concerned about recent developments. We've lost 3 major clients and are at risk of losing Kyoto. Stock price is down 18% in 5 days, and Connor Blake seems to think the solution is to threaten legal action against you." "I see. No, I don't think you do." Her voice was tired. "I voted against hiring Connor. I thought Veltrix needed evolution, not revolution. But I was outvoted by board members who thought disruption was always positive." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because tomorrow morning, I'm going to propose that the board terminate Connor Blake and offer you a position as Executive Vice President of International Markets, full autonomy, double your previous salary, and a seat on the executive committee." The offer hung in the air between us. Everything I'd worked for at Veltrix, everything Connor had taken away, being handed back with interest, all I had to do was say yes. "I appreciate the offer," I said slowly, "but I have to decline." "May I ask why?" "Because Veltrix had their chance. They chose Connor Blake and his vision of corporate culture. They chose to value posturing over performance. And most importantly, they chose to dismiss expertise when it didn't come in the package they expected." I took a breath. I've built something better. My clients trust me not because of the name on the building, but because of the value I provide. I won't give that up. There was a long pause. "I understand, and for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. But Natalie, Connor won't go quietly. He's already talking about lawsuits, claiming you stole proprietary information. He's welcome to try. My lawyers are very good, and his email trail is very damaging, particularly the one where he insulted Japanese business culture in writing." A soft laugh. "Yes, that was spectacularly stupid. Wasn't it? Good luck tomorrow. I have a feeling Kyoto will make the right choice." The call ended, but its implications echoed. Veltrix was in freefall, and Connor was desperate enough to make legal threats. But I had something more powerful than corporate backing. I had the truth. And in business, as in war, the truth was often the most devastating weapon. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of wind that cut through Chicago like a blade. I arrived at the Peninsula Hotel an hour early, using the time to center myself, to review my materials one last time, to prepare for what could be the most important presentation of my career. The Kyoto team arrived precisely on time, filing into the private conference room I'd reserved. No power plays, no keeping them waiting, no games, just respect. Takahashi-san, Yamamoto-san, distinguished colleagues, I began in Japanese, then switched to English. Thank you for this opportunity to present NK Strategy's vision for Kyoto International's North American expansion. What followed was 90 minutes of strategic brilliance. Not my assessment that came from Ms. Yamamoto and her evaluation later. I presented a 5-year plan that didn't just enter the North American market but redefined it. Using Kyoto's AI-driven logistics platform as a foundation, we would create partnerships with mid-sized American companies hungry for efficiency but wary of disruption. We'd implement gradually, respecting existing relationships while demonstrating value. We'd build trust before seeking transformation. The American market doesn't need another logistics company, I concluded. It needs a logistics partner. Kyoto International has the technology, NK Strategies has the relationships. Together, we can create something unprecedented. The room was quiet. In American business, silence meant failure. In Japanese business, it meant consideration. Finally, Takahashi spoke. Kine-san, this proposal addresses every concern we've expressed and several we hadn't yet articulated, but I must ask, what about Veltrix? They've indicated they may take legal action if we proceed with NK Strategies. I'd been waiting for this. Reaching into my portfolio, I withdrew a single sheet of paper. This morning, Steinberg, Cole and Associates, filed a preemptive declaration with the Illinois Business Court. It establishes that NK Strategies has no non-compete obligations to Veltrix Dynamics, that all client relationships were developed through personal effort rather than corporate resources, and that any attempt to interfere with our business relationships will be met with counterclaims for tortious interference and defamation. I placed the paper on the table. In simpler terms, they can threaten, but they can't touch us. Yamamoto reviewed the document, her expression shifting from concern to something that might have been admiration. You anticipated this. I anticipated everything. That's what strategic consultants do. Another silence, shorter this time. Then Takahashi stood, and the entire delegation rose with him. Kine-san, he said formally, Kyoto International would be honored to work with NK Strategies. We'll have our legal team review the contracts, but barring any surprises, consider this partnership confirmed. The bow he offered was deep, formal, the kind reserved for moments of significant commitment. I returned it, feeling the weight of success settling on my shoulders like armor. 2 hours later, as I sat in my office, my real office now, not the borrowed space but a suite I'd leased that morning in anticipation, my phone buzzed with notifications. The first was from Linda Voss. Heard the good news. Comment. The second was from Marcus. Connor just got fired. Board meeting lasted 12 minutes. Security is escorting him out. The third was from a number I recognized but hadn't seen in years. Adrian Cross, CEO of Meridian Logistics, Veltrix's biggest competitor. Ms. Keene, his message read, I believe we should talk about your future, and ours. But I didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. Instead, I stood at my window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, and allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. Connor Blake had thought he was eliminating an obstacle when he fired me in that conference room. He'd believed that power came from position, that authority came from titles, that success came from domination. He'd been wrong about everything. Real power came from relationships, real authority came from expertise, and real success that came from understanding a fundamental truth of international business in a global economy. The person who bridges cultures doesn't just add value, they become invaluable. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a Swiss number, NK Strategies European office, where I'd hired a small team to handle overnight communications with Asian clients. Good morning, Ms. Keene, my Swiss office manager said. I have 3 inquiries from Japanese companies seeking representation in American markets. Should I schedule calls? Please do. But not this week. This week, we celebrate. Celebrate. We just signed Kyoto International. But more than that, we proved something important. What's that? I smiled, thinking of Connor Blake clearing out his office, of the Veltrix board realizing their mistake, of every executive who'd ever underestimated the quiet woman who spoke multiple languages and understood that business was about more than numbers. We proved that you should never fire someone in the middle of a negotiation. They might just take the deal with them. The weeks that followed blurred into a symphony of controlled chaos. NK Strategies went from concept to corporation almost overnight, with new clients reaching out daily. Some came from my network, others from word of mouth, and more than a few from companies who'd read between the lines of Linda Voss's increasingly detailed coverage of Veltrix's implosion. But the sweetest victory came in an unexpected form. I was reviewing contracts in my office when Marcus knocked on the door, his expression somewhere between amused and incredulous. "You're going to want to see this," he said, handing me a printed email. It was from Connor Blake's personal email address, sent to my corporate inbox. The subject line read, "Mutual Benefit Proposal." I read it twice, certain I was misunderstanding. Connor was offering his services as a strategic advisor to NK Strategies, claiming his unique insights into Western corporate culture would complement my Eastern focus. He proposed a generous consulting fee and flexible hours to accommodate his other ventures. "Is he serious?" I asked Marcus. "Dead serious. He's been shopping himself around the industry for 2 weeks. No takers." Marcus's smile was sharp. "Turns out, burning bridges is bad for business. Who knew?" I drafted my response carefully, professionally, without a hint of the satisfaction I felt. "Mr. Blake, thank you for your interest in NK Strategies. After careful consideration, we've determined that your approach to international business doesn't align with our corporate values. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." Short, polite, and devastating. The same tone he'd used when dismissing my years of relationship building as just liaison work. But the universe wasn't done with its poetry yet. 3 months after launching NK Strategies, I received an invitation to speak at the International Business Forum in Tokyo. The topic, Building Bridges in a Borderless Economy, the Future of Cross-Cultural Corporate Strategy. The invitation itself was an honor, but the real satisfaction came from the list of other speakers. There, sandwiched between a Nobel economist and a former ambassador, was Connor Blake, speaking on aggressive growth strategies in global markets. I accepted immediately. Tokyo in spring was breathtaking, cherry blossoms painting the city in shades of pink and white. The conference was held at the Palace Hotel, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the Imperial Gardens. It was the kind of venue that whispered power and influence in every polished surface. I arrived a day early to meet with clients. Kyoto's integration into North American markets was exceeding all projections, and Takahashi wanted to discuss expansion into European markets. 3 other Japanese firms had retained NK Strategies after seeing our work with Kyoto. My calendar was full, my business thriving, and my reputation solidified. The morning of the conference, I was having breakfast in the hotel restaurant when Connor Blake walked in. He saw me immediately, hard to miss, the only Western woman sitting alone in a sea of business suits, and for a moment, I watched him decide whether to acknowledge me. Professional courtesy won. He approached my table with the kind of forced casualness that screamed discomfort. "Natalie, I heard you were speaking today." "Connor," I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Would you like to join me?" He sat reluctantly, like a man approaching a dentist's chair. Up close, I could see the stress of the past months etched in lines around his eyes. His suit was expensive but wrinkled, his smile practiced but hollow. "Congratulations on your success," he said, the words clearly painful. "NK Strategies has made quite an impact." "Thank you. How are things with you?" "Good. Great. Actually, I'm consulting independently now, helping companies optimize their growth strategies." "That's wonderful." We sat in uncomfortable silence, the weight of unspoken truths heavy between us. Finally, Connor leaned forward. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "How did you do it?" How did you take everything so quickly? I set down my coffee cup, choosing my words carefully. I didn't take anything. Connor, I built something. Every client who came to NK Strategies made a choice. They chose expertise over ego, relationships over transactions, understanding over undermining. But the Kyoto deal was never yours to lose. You see, that's what you never understood. These aren't just contracts or revenue streams. They're partnerships built on trust, respect, and mutual benefit. You can't strong-arm trust. You can't fast-track respect. And you certainly can't fake cultural understanding. His face flushed. So this is revenge destroying my career because I fired you. No, Connor, this isn't revenge. This is consequence. You made choices based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how global business works. Those choices had results. The fact that I benefited from your mistakes doesn't make me vengeful. It makes me opportunistic. There's a difference. I could have fought you, he said quietly. Could have tied you up in lawsuits. You could have tried, but we both know how that would have ended. Your email about cultural barriers alone would have destroyed Veltrix in a discrimination lawsuit. The board knew it, your lawyers knew it, and deep down, you knew it too. He stood abruptly. I should prepare for my presentation. Connor. He stopped but didn't turn. A word of advice. Your audience today will be 80% Asian executives. Maybe skip the part about American-style efficiency being superior to their methods. He left without responding, his shoulders rigid with suppressed anger, but I'd seen something else in his eyes, the dawning realization that he'd architected his own downfall. The conference was a triumph. My presentation drew a standing ovation, with executives approaching afterward to discuss potential partnerships. I spoke about the future of business being not in domination, but in collaboration, not in cultural supremacy, but in cultural synthesis. Every point I made was a direct rebuke to Connor's philosophy. Though I never mentioned him by name, Connor's presentation, scheduled right after mine, was sparsely attended. Those who did stay shifted uncomfortably as he pushed his aggressive growth strategies to an audience that valued steady, sustainable expansion. When he used the phrase, move fast and break things, Silicon Valley's favorite mantra, I watched several Japanese executives exchange glances that spoke volumes, but the final stroke came from an unexpected source. That evening, at the conference gala, I was approached by Robert Kim, CEO of Pinnacle Logistics, the company that had tried to acquire Kyoto. Ms. Keene, he said, offering a glass of champagne. That was an impressive presentation. Thank you. Mr. Kim, I have a confession. When Kyoto chose to work with you instead of accepting our acquisition offer, I was furious. I couldn't understand why they'd choose a small consultancy over our resources. He smiled. Now I do. You offered them something we couldn't respect for who they are, not just what they could become. That's kind of you to say. It's strategic of me to say. Pinnacle is looking to expand into Southeast Asian markets. We need someone who understands that expansion isn't about conquest, it's about collaboration. Would NK Strategies be interested in a partnership? I nearly choked on my champagne. Pinnacle Logistics was a billion-dollar company. A partnership with them would transform NK Strategies from a successful consultancy to a major player. I'd be very interested in discussing that, I managed. Excellent. My assistant will coordinate with yours. Oh, and Ms. Keene. He lowered his voice. Connor Blake approached us last month about a strategic role. We passed. Any executive who thinks insulting a client's culture is a negotiation tactic doesn't understand the first thing about global business. As he walked away, I caught sight of Connor across the room, standing alone despite the crowd, his isolation as complete as if he were on an island. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, I saw him finally understand. He'd thought power was about position. He'd believed authority came from domination. He'd been certain that his way, the aggressive, American, alpha male way, was the only path to success. But the world had changed while he wasn't paying attention. Globalization didn't mean everyone becoming American, it meant Americans learning to become global. And in that new world, The person who could navigate cultures, build bridges, and create genuine partnerships didn't just succeed, they thrived. I raised my glass slightly in his direction, not a mockery, but an acknowledgement. We'd both played the game according to our understanding of the rules. The difference was, I'd understood that the rules themselves were changing. Connor didn't return the gesture. He simply turned and walked out of the gala, out of the conference, and effectively, out of the international business community he'd tried so hard to dominate. 6 months later, NK Strategies had offices in Chicago, Tokyo, Singapore, and London. Our client list read like a Fortune 500 directory, and our revenue had exceeded my wildest projections. Marcus had proven himself invaluable as COO, building systems that scaled elegantly across cultures and time zones. But the moment that truly marked our transformation from startup to success came in an unexpected place: the Veltrix Dynamics annual shareholder meeting. I wasn't there, of course, but Linda Voss was, and her coverage was extensive. The board had to explain how they'd lost not just the Kyoto deal, but 17 other major clients, how their stock price had dropped 40% in 6 months, how their expansion into Asian markets had stalled completely. Elizabeth Hartwell, the board member who'd called me that night, asked the question that everyone was thinking but no one wanted to voice: how did we lose so much so quickly? The answer, when it came, was simple. We forgot that in international business, relationships matter more than rhetoric. We prioritized posturing over performance, and we fired the one person who understood how to bridge the gap between what we were and what we wanted to become. They didn't mention me by name. They didn't need to. Everyone knew. The epilogue to this story came a year later, in the form of a handwritten note delivered to my office. It was from Connor Blake. "Natalie," it read, "I've spent the past year reflecting on our interaction in Tokyo. You were right about everything. I confused confidence with competence, aggression with leadership, and worst of all, I dismissed expertise because it came packaged in a way I didn't respect. I'm writing to apologize, not to seek forgiveness or opportunity, but because you deserve to hear it. I've left corporate consulting and am teaching business communications at a community college. It's humbling work, but necessary. Perhaps if I can help the next generation understand what I failed to grasp, some good can come from my failures. I hope NK Strategies continues to thrive. The business world needs more bridges and fewer walls. Sincerely, Connor Blake." I read the note twice, then filed it away. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Success isn't just about winning, it's about understanding why you won. And sometimes, the greatest victory is when your opponent finally understands it too. NK Strategies continued to grow, but more importantly, it continued to evolve. We became known not just for facilitating deals, but for creating partnerships that transformed industries. Our approach, cultural intelligence combined with strategic expertise, became a Harvard Business School case study. Young consultants sought us out, eager to learn that there was another way to do business, a way that didn't require choosing between profit and principle, and Connor Blake. He found his own form of redemption in teaching. I heard from former students occasionally, young professionals who'd learned from him the importance of cultural humility and the danger of unchecked ego. He'd become, in his way, an effective educator, perhaps because he could teach from the perspective of someone who'd learned every lesson the hard way. But that's the thing about failure in business. It's only truly failure if you don't learn from it. Connor learned, Veltrix learned, the industry learned, and in learning, they validated everything I'd built NK Strategies to represent. The last time I saw Connor was 3 years later, at another industry conference. He was sitting in the audience as I delivered a keynote on the evolution of global business strategy. When our eyes met, he nodded a gesture of respect between former adversaries who'd both found their proper places in the world. After my speech, as attendees gathered for questions, someone asked about the biggest challenge in building a global consultancy from scratch. The biggest challenge, I said, was resisting the temptation to build it in opposition to something else. It would have been easy to make NK Strategies the anti-Veltrix, to define ourselves by what we weren't rather than what we were. But true success doesn't come from reaction, it comes from vision. We succeeded not because we were against aggressive tactics, but because we were for collaborative solutions. The questioner persisted. But didn't your success come directly from Veltrix's failure? I smiled. Veltrix didn't fail because I succeeded. They failed because they forgot that in a global economy, the company that understands all its stakeholders doesn't just survive, it thrives. My success was a consequence of that forgetting, not its cause. As the session ended and I prepared to leave the stage, I caught sight of Connor in the crowd. He was applauding not the polite, obligatory applause of conference attendance, but genuine appreciation. It was, perhaps, the most honest moment we'd ever shared. Because in the end, this wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about evolution, about an industry transforming from old models of dominance to new paradigms of partnership, about individuals learning that true power comes not from pushing others down, but from lifting entire ecosystems up. Connor Blake thought he was firing an obstacle. Instead, he freed a catalyst. And in doing so, he taught the business world a lesson worth more than any deal. Never underestimate the quiet competence of someone who understands that in global business. Bridges beat walls every single time. As I left the conference that day, my phone buzzed with a message from Takahashi. Kyoto International had just been named one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in the world, and he wanted to thank me for helping them navigate the cultural complexities of international expansion. Kina-san, his message read, we couldn't have done this without understanding that success in America doesn't mean becoming American. It means becoming the best version of ourselves in a new context. Thank you for seeing that when others couldn't. I smiled, thinking back to that morning 3 years ago when Connor Blake had fired me in front of the Kyoto delegation. He'd thought he was demonstrating strength. Instead, he'd revealed weakness, the fundamental weakness of believing that there was only one way to succeed in business. But there isn't one way. There are as many ways as there are cultures, companies, and individuals willing to learn from each other. NK Strategies had proven that. Our clients had proven that. And in his own way, even Connor Blake had proven that by learning from his failures and passing those lessons on to others. The taxi pulled up to my hotel, and as I stepped out into the afternoon sun, my phone rang. It was a potential client, a German manufacturing firm looking to expand into Asian markets. They'd heard about our approach, our philosophy of cultural bridge building, and wanted to explore how we might help them succeed without sacrificing their identity. When can we meet? The CEO asked. I pulled up my calendar, seeing the weeks ahead filled with similar conversations, similar opportunities to build bridges where others might build walls. How about next week? I suggested. I'll be in Frankfurt for another client meeting. We could discuss how to help you expand while remaining authentically yourselves. That sounds perfect, he said. We've seen too many companies lose themselves trying to conquer new markets. We'd rather grow with wisdom than dominate with force. As I ended the call, I realized that this CEO had articulated perfectly what NK Strategies represented: the radical idea that in business, as in life, wisdom beats force, understanding beats undermining, and bridges beat walls. Connor Blake had given me an unexpected gift when he fired me that day. He'd forced me to prove that there was another way, a better way, to navigate the complexities of global business, and in proving it, I'd helped change an industry's understanding of what success could look like. Not bad for someone he'd dismissed as just a liaison. Not bad at all.